and professor of the César E. Chávez Department of Chicana and Chicano Studies. This is my 21st year at UCLA, which I find hard to believe. I feel like I just started yesterday. Thank you everyone for coming. I want to welcome you. I have a few brief opening remarks, and there are some other opening remarks, and then we will get started. Today is a banner day for us in Chicano Studies at UCLA. 25 years ago, despite fierce student activism on campus, no one knew what would become of Chicano Studies at UCLA. Would we become a full-fledged department like English, political science, and math? Or would we remain a center? Would there be faculty lines? Would there be resources to recruit distinguished scholars and artists and writers? Would there be space on this campus to grow a department? Would there be students to take our courses? Would we have majors and minors? Would we have graduate students? There was a lot of uncertainty at the time 25 years ago, but that was then. Today, I'm proud to say that we are a department of 15 full-time faculty members, and that number is growing. We have almost 700 majors and minors, and we are the fastest growing department. We are the fastest growing department in the Division of Social Sciences at UCLA. Our introductory courses for the major are so large that we have to have 2 lecture courses back to back in order to accommodate student enrollments of upwards of 800 students per class. Those are the largest undergraduate surveys at UCLA. And we also have a full-fledged PhD program with upwards of 35 graduate students all working towards their PhD. These numbers are a testament to our success and to our hard work. They reflect the commitment of student activists and organizers, of faculty and administrators who shared their vision, and of the many, many students who made Chicano Studies their home at UCLA. We're here today to honor the students who started the whole thing, creating national news by demanding the establishment of a department to study the life history and experiences of a group who comprise today a demographic majority in California, and particularly in Los Angeles City and County. Our department represents that majority, as we also represent other Latino groups who look to Chicano Studies as an inclusive space that represents their experiences and struggles. We are an inclusive department, we are a diverse department, and we represent diverse voices and diverse communities. That's one word that you're going to hear a lot today, the word community. It's a word that we hear a lot in Chicano Studies, and there's always the implication that there's one single community out there. But in fact, we represent many communities. Central American communities, gay and lesbian communities, generational communities, Spanish-speaking communities, English-speaking communities, Spanglish-speaking communities. We represent immigrant communities and indigenous communities. And we also represent student bodies, faculties, and administrators. So there are many different communities under the banner of Chicano Studies at UCLA, and that's something that I'm especially proud of. My community, the community that I look to for inspiration, is the community of our students. More than any one single individual, I believe that we owe the success of our department to our hard-working students whose numbers are growing every year. Our students, most of whom are the first in their families to go to college, who don't know the ropes, who come to UCLA as a strange and unfamiliar environment, and yet they still manage to succeed. Our students, most of whom hold full-time jobs and still manage to succeed. Our students, some of whom have their own families and still manage to succeed. And our students who face pressure at home to come back home, not to go so far, and yet they still manage to succeed. Our students are the best. In my opinion, they reflect the very best of UCLA and the very best of higher public education in California. That's something I hope that we remember throughout the day, to remember the past struggles, and partly I hope also to celebrate our achievements, our growth, and especially our student body. Mostly we are here today to honor the legacy of student activism, to commemorate the struggles that led to the creation of this department. As a symposium today, you will hear multiple perspectives and different points of view. We have 2 panels. This is not meant to be exhaustive or comprehensive. Many people were part of the struggle, and not everyone is represented on one of the 2 panels. But we tried our best. So the purpose of today is to remember, to commemorate, to honor, and inspire. Before we get started, I have to say a few thank yous. In the best tradition of Chicano Studies, we begin by thanking the people who work behind the scenes to make this all happen. And by that, I mean our dedicated staff, especially Chris Palomo, Sandy Garcia, Brenda Trujillo, and Aguilar-Hernández, the people who handle the logistics, the problem solving, and the hard work of coordinating an event like this. I want to thank all of the participants for joining us today. I want to thank everyone in the audience for joining us today, and I want to send a special thank you to Professor Jose Manuel Aguilar. Professor Aguilar was one of the first majors in Chicana and Chicano Studies at UCLA, and he went on to earn his PhD in education from UCLA under the supervision of Dr. Danny Solorzano. Professor Aguilar wrote his dissertation about our department and the student activism that led to our department. No one knows this department inside and out, all of its beauty, all of its blemishes, than Professor Jose Manuel Aguilar. I think of Professor Aguilar as our departmental scribe, and I want to thank him especially for the initial conception of having this event today. So good to have all of you back. I'm looking forward to a fruitful, productive, and inspiring discussion, and thanks again for joining us today.
Good afternoon. My name is Chon Noriega. I'm the director of the UCLA Chicano Studies Research Center. And when the hunger strikes happened, it was the end of my first year as a professor here. And I was teaching what at that time was the largest Chicano Studies course offered on campus through the film department. It was Chicano Cinema. So many of the students that were eventually be part of the protest and the hunger strike were also in that course. The next year I went to Cornell University and I taught as a visiting scholar for a year. And oddly enough, the students ended up taking over the university in protest of vandalism against Chicano Latino art. And again, it related to a course. It seems to follow me, but it was really an amazing time to be here and to see some really fundamental issues brought to the surface, made so that it's impossible to ignore them. And to say that, and to grapple with the fact that the inequities that initiated the degree program and the center continued and needed to be addressed. So I'm delighted to welcome you to this symposium. And I want to give a little bit of a context to this, and by noting that 50 years ago, a diverse group of students organized at UCLA calling for the creation of a research center that would play a transformative role on the campus with an academic press, a library, archival holdings, research that would be done across disciplines, and community partnerships. That all of these were important individually, but bringing them together was the first and remains the first time that has happened at any university in this country, both for Chicano studies, but also for Asian American studies, African American studies, and American Indian studies. Now what happened is that soon after the formation of the Chicano Studies Research Center, the center would be allocated faculty positions to diversify the faculty in traditional departments, a role that the center still plays. And I would like to acknowledge some of those faculty that are here today, starting with Vio Estrada, Steve Loza, and Concepcion Valadez, who is retired but still very much active with the campus. The center has 6 such positions and really plays a role in terms of diversifying across traditional departments. At the same time that was happening, the center would also incubate and support an interdepartmental degree program that would become the department. And what I want to note is that the reason that the Ethnic Studies Centers did this is because the college would not support such programs. And for something on the order of 15 years, the centers were the ones putting up the money to make the degree program possible. And so when the university moved to try to shut down the Chicano Studies degree program, they weren't even paying for it. So that leads to 25 years ago when a diverse group of students protested efforts from the Office of the Chancellor to shut down the degree program. And you will hear from the participants in that protest, which led to the departmentalization of the program. But it also set a precedent that then is being applied to all of the other ethnic studies degree programs. So that leads to today, where we look back at this history, but what I want to emphasize is that we should do so with an eye to the change that is needed now. Much has improved since 1968 and 1993. The CSRC, the Chicano Studies Research Center, will soon celebrate its 50th anniversary. The Chavez Department, as Eric pointed out, is vibrant and growing, the fastest growing, much like the Latino population itself, in its division. But much remains to be done. At UCLA today, 30 departments have not a single Latino faculty member. 15 have just one, in some cases just a half of one. You wonder, how did they do that? They refine the technology such that they can actually hire half a Latino, right? There are precious few Latino and Latina administrators. By my count, this year, right now, we have 3 chairs out of close to 70, 80 departments. 2 of them are in the audience here, Steve Loza and Eric Avila. There's 1 dean, Gary Segura, in Alaskan Public Affairs, and there are 0 vice chancellors. So out of a group of about 110 people, there are essentially 4, and that number will actually be smaller come July 1st. Be smaller by at least 1. So there's work to do in making the entire campus accessible for Latino students, faculty, staff, and administrators. And I encourage you in the course of today's discussion to really, take in what the participants and those who have kind of studied them and their contributions, take in the importance of what they've done historically, but let's think also about where we are today and what we need to do going forward. Thank you. And our last introducer will be Charlene Villaseñor-Black, who's the person who's actually straddling both the department and the Chicano Studies Research Center.
Thank you. I'll be brief. I'm really honored to be here to help introduce this really important conference commemorating the hunger strike that created Chicana and Chicano Studies here at UCLA. And I really want to take this moment to highlight the important role that students played in this endeavor. Without these former students, we wouldn't have Chicana and Chicano Studies today here at the university. And your actions, their actions, highlight for me the power of Raza students to make changes in the academy, right? The power of Raza student voices in academia, the power to inspire our research and our teacher and our teaching. And this actually gives me hope for the future, hope even amid this difficult national political moment. Latinx students right now comprise 19.6% of the student body at UCLA, And you heard Eric talking about the Intro to Chicano Studies. It's almost 900 students, and this has been going on since 2015, and how this incredible program has grown. I wanted to mention also the Chicanx Latinx theme floor or living learning community in the residence halls, in the dorms. There are 200 students living there now, and I'm honored to be their advisor. And we've grown from 25 students 8 years ago to now 200 students and a wait list. We really need to work on increasing the amount of Latinx faculty here at UCLA. We're at 6.6% of the faculty, and that's just simply not enough in a state where we are the majority and in a city where 51% of us speak Spanish. But on a happier note, I want to thank our students, past and current, for their dedication and vision for the thriving state of Chicana and Chicano Studies. It was your dream, and we're all benefiting from it now. Thank you.
All right, good afternoon. I am Jose Aguilar-Hernández, and this day is, I can't even begin to explain how humbled and honored I am. I want to begin by saying that I have given lots of talks on this work in different universities across the U.S. and MECHA chapters and student groups, because they're all fascinated at what happened here at UCLA. And every time I give this talk, I show up and I'm like, I do my research, I miss my bed, and I go home. But I'll tell you that today is incredibly different for multiple reasons. And one of them is because there's a lot of you in the audience that made this department possible. The reason I get to stand here and to be a visiting assistant professor this quarter at UCLA is because of you. And I want you to know that I am thankful for the opportunity to have this moment to reflect and to share some of the work that I have done over the years, and what an honor it is to return. So I want to say that as an undergraduate student, when I came to UCLA, I was quickly asked, like, who are you? What do you do? Like, what's your story? And especially in Chicana and Chicano Studies, we asked those questions of identity. So, we learned Black feminism, and we understood this concept of positionality and the importance of it. So when I reflect back on my positionality, I think about the importance of being the son of immigrant farm workers from Zacatecas, Mexico, who arrived to Oxnard, California with big dreams, with little money, big dreams to make sure that their children had a better opportunity in a place like the United States. My father's dream for me was that I access an air-conditioned job. And when he would come home from the strawberry fields, he would tell me, look at my hands, I'm doing this for you. So I owe a lot to him, and I'm sure he's with me in spirit today. And I think of the importance then of social movements like the United Farm Workers in my livelihood. And what was important about this was that I eventually, fast forward in the 90s, I wasn't at UCLA, I was actually in high school, and I was walking out of high school, specifically against Proposition 187, and I was speaking about this with some of the panelists earlier, that I'm like, I don't know if this is genetic memory or what it is, but I just got up when everyone else did and walked out with them, because there was something there that motivated me to participate in that action, and it was an important moment to protest Proposition 187, and in many ways, knowing that this is part of my history, allowed me to arrive to UCLA and to first learn of the 14-day hunger strike that took place here at UCLA in Schomburg Quad 25 years ago today. 25 years ago today was day one of the 14-day hunger strike. And I specifically heard about this through Juan Gomez Quiñones' class, but also through a small video that Elias Serna produced called Nuestros Esfuerzos. And it was such an impactful moment for me to understand that the seat I was in was demanded, and that people had used multiple strategies to make sure that I could be there. I went to Aguilar-Hernández's office, as a lot of us do when we start here at UCLA. Everybody's like, you have a question? Go talk to Eli. And I showed up, and I was a different major, and then I met Eli. And Eli changed my life in so many ways. And she told me, take this class. Professor Eric Avila teaches a great class. And have you taken Abel Valenzuela? And have you taken all these other faculty? And I became involved in the department, and eventually I became a tutor for Chicana and Chicano Studies with the Academic Advancement Program. When I left, I returned to be the director of Mechacalmecac in the Community Programs Office, and then came back because I was like, I think I'm a nerd. I came back and I did the Master's in Latin American Studies when I served as a reader in the department. And then Daniel Solorzano was kind enough to recruit me into the education PhD program, where then I became a TA in the department. So to return today brings a lot of emotion for me. Not only as a proud triple Bruin, triple alumni, but also in just complete honor and respect and gratitude to everyone in the room and many people that aren't here for your activism, for your work, for your leadership, for your vision, for your advocacy in multiple levels to allow this Chicanito farm worker parents be able to arrive and wear suits and be able to share some of the research that I have done. So arriving to this topic was important for multiple reasons, and one of them is that it gave me place. So the first class I took in Chicana and Chicano Studies was a class on the United Farm Workers. That was transformational. It was a class that Fernando Gapacin taught. And when I entered that class, it was different. I'm getting chills remembering, because farm workers were being talked about in a complex way, not only in terms of how farm workers experience discrimination and systemic oppression, but also how farm workers are knowledge producers, and also how farm workers change the world. And what's interesting about that is that I knew that because I was the son of farm workers. So to have my parents validated for the first time in my entire academic career changed my life. And in many ways, perhaps that's another moment that was key for me. Some of the research that I'd like to share with you today stems with what I did in my dissertation, some of the work that I did, but then kind of looking toward the future. I did a dissertation study that focused more on 1990 through 1993, which for now I'm calling the social movement section of this larger history of departmentalization in Chicana and Chicano Studies. Not to say activism doesn't come in multiple forms, but between 90 and 93 there was many examples of social movement that took place during that time. And I used 39 oral histories at that time, a lot of archival research and breadth of literature review to help me come to a number of historical flashpoints that I think really helped me make sense of what happened between 90 to 93. And those flashpoints include, an April 24th, 1990 rally, where members of Mecha de UCLA understood the recommendation or the conclusion of the Academic Senate to suspend the major as an invitation to protest. And they got together in the front of Campbell Hall. They marched over to Chancellor Young's office and they conducted a sit-in, asking to meet with him. Chancellor Young didn't meet with them that day. And eventually a lot of strategies were used. I'll show you some examples of those from the archives. April 28th, on the eve of César Chávez's funeral, who had just passed away, Chancellor Young announces his decision to deny department structure to Chicana and Chicano Studies. May 11th, 1993, in this building, a group of students took over and held a sit-in. And the following day, Mecha de UCLA organized a rally for Chicana and Chicano Studies that then also included the demands of the folks that had held the sit-in in relationship to saving funding for the Chicano Studies Research Center and specifically its library. And after that, the hunger strike that took place for 2 weeks here in Schomburg Quad. And what's exciting about being a researcher, and I love the archives, is that you start looking for things and you go through a lot of stuff, and then you find like these kind of magical moments like this one. I was in Los Angeles Mission College with Professor Jose Maldonado in the Chicano Center. And he says, oh, you study the hunger strike? Let me show you this photo that I have. And this photo happens to be April 24th, 1990, of Mecha de UCLA when they held the sit-in in front of Chancellor Young's office. And what's really powerful about this image, when I asked, the Mecha chapter at that time, is that they're like, well, yeah, we're in there, but actually Mecha de CSUN is there, and the external structure of Mecha is there, specifically the community college Mecha chapters, including Mecha de Cerritos Community College. And after the strike, I think it really galvanized them to make sense of what they were going to do to demand a department structure once they decided they wanted a department structure. And some of the strategies they used was, in the archives we find so many examples of literature that they produced. With concrete information, with concrete positions and demands that they were making early. And what I think is also powerful about this is that, sorry, my computer is doing something, is the use of literature, in a time of social media, right? Like now we tweet, now we do this, we do that, but the importance of doing this, and I would ask them, what would you do with them? Like, well, we would start a brew and walk and just distribute them. These examples, and we would ask people to join the struggle for Chicana and Chicano Studies. And then they moved to other forms of strategies, including lobbying. That yellow sheet to the left, although you cannot see, includes members of Mecha de UCLA, but also administration, including people like Provost Orbach and Scott Waugh, who was Dean of Social Sciences, and other folks where they were meeting, and various faculty like Vilma Ortiz and George Sanchez and many others. But mechistas like Norma Rojas, Carla Salazar, who were meeting. Carlos Gribalca, I know, is also in the audience. He was one of the faculty from psychology involved in this, and Richard Chabran. I mean, there's so many. And in these meetings, they were meeting in terms of like, what do we do now? And the students were clear that they wanted a department. They didn't feel those meetings went far enough, so they shifted to other strategies, including having a town hall on December 1st, 1990, where they talked about, let's write a proposal. So in those time period, they're using all kinds of other strategies, and eventually, in January of '92, a group of majority Chicano Latino faculty submitted a proposal to the administration, and as you know, that didn't work at that time. And then the students were incredibly connected and got letters from all sorts of people in support of Chicana and Chicano Studies as a department structure, including here 2 samples, one from Hilda Solis and the other one from Lucille Roybal Allard. And these were people that were writing into Chancellor Young demanding a department of Chicana and Chicano Studies. I'm totally geeking out because I'm seeing everybody walk in and I'm like, hi everyone, let me just say hi really quick. Then they created the United Community and Labor Alliance to spell out UCLA on purpose, which was a collective of community leaders, labor organizers, faculty, students that would meet at La Golondrina on Olvera Street to envision the department, and they would actually demand Chancellor Young and his administration to meet them there. Sometimes they went. And in these proposals, what they would do is they would just share and connect with Mecha and with some of these other organizations, and many faculty were involved. Some of these names here are, of course, incredibly important, including David Hayes Bautista, Sonia Saldivar-Hull, Eddie Tellez, Ray Rocco, so many on here. And then, because of the announcement of Chancellor Young, the students shift to the strategy of a sit-in. Here, and the students are here, they're going to talk to you. Well, alumni. I don't want to keep you in your student role, but the alumni are going to speak about the role as students. But this was a traumatic event. As I've had students and some of these folks share, it's clear that they weren't expecting that at the end of the night, 41 men and 42 women would be sent to jail for protest in this case. And it was an important chapter, and I want to point out really quick that this is Michelle Tellez, who is now a professor at the University of Arizona in Mexican American Studies, and there's many others that weren't here today, and as they come to mind, I'll make sure and share. After the sit-in, the 14-day hunger strike, I think, was an important strategy and an important way of protest. because as many people who have written on this and made sense of it, this is the strategy that I think culminated the effort to eventually force administration to negotiate with the students. They took over Schomburg Quad, and this image right here, I believe is Balbina, Cindy, and Norma, who were three of the strikers, and then Professor Jorge Mancias here with his mom. And this image specifically was powerful for me because when I interviewed Professor Jorge Mancias, he was an assistant professor here, and he decided to join the strike, and he said, at the right time, someone just kind of took a picture of my mother holding me. And it's an incredibly moving picture because he says, I was feeling like a little tired or something, but there was something about mom's affirmation that kept me going at that moment. And it's also special for me to have his son here in the audience with us today, who is now a doctoral student in the sociology department here at UCLA. Now, within the hunger strike, there was also this massive manifestation of community, which was this pilgrimage that started at Olvera Street. And every time I interviewed the people that were part of the pilgrimage, they're like, we got to Olvera Street early, Vivian Bonzo was there, the Olvera Street Merchant Association was there, some people showed up, but not everybody showed up. It was raining that day. But then along the way, they managed to recruit up to 1,000 people when they got to the UCLA campus. So these images are really powerful because they show that, right? And some of you might recognize this amazing, strong woman here, Aguilar-Hernández, who was part of that pilgrimage with her son, Walter Thompson-Hernández, on their way to UCLA to demand Chicana and Chicano Studies department and to ask Chancellor Young to negotiate the demands of the students. Now, I also want to say a few things that what my work has really done is to put these historical flashpoints at UCLA into larger 1990s context. If you will, some of the work that I have done is really about arguing that the 1990s was a decade of unrest. We often, I think, automatically agree that the 60s were a decade of unrest because of the civil rights movements, but I also want to claim the 90s historically as a decade of unrest, as a decade in which there was a rise of social movements, including UCLA, but also including the Los Angeles uprising around Rodney King, the student protest of 187, the Zapatista uprising in 94 protesting the drafting of NAFTA, and also the American Indian movement and indigenous communities all across the American continent protesting, the so-called the 500-year anniversary of the so-called discovery of the land by Columbus. So the movement to abolish Columbus Day was also strong in 1992. And this movement here at UCLA happened within this kind of broader context of protest. And interestingly enough, if we were to just kind of single out the 1990s as this decade of unrest and look at the UC system alone, there was 9 campuses in the 90s. If you notice, UC Merced wasn't opened yet. So out of the 9 campuses, in the 1990s alone, there were 6 hunger strikes on in this system. That tells us something about protest and strategies that students were using at that time. Not all of them were successful. That's why when I go to Gonzaga University or University of Texas at Austin and they ask me what worked, I'm like, I have so much to tell you. How much time do you have? Let me tell you why I think it worked. But it's a powerful story here at UCLA. And as the folks were saying before, the numbers of Latinas and Latinos were increasing dramatically in the 90s, not only in county and in California, but if we just single out the 1990s, the census shows that LA County was well over 25%. They were at 38% in the county. In California, 1 in 4 Latinas and Latinos form part of there was one of 4 people in California are Latino descent, and 9 in the United States. And as you see over the years, those numbers continue to increase. So this increase of Latinas and Latinos is an important moment historically. And I think it's important because it helps us then look at the archives and make sense of how UCLA was making sense and the community was making sense of these demographic shifts. This is a gem. This letter here is an archival piece out of the Milo Alvarez archive, which is a letter by César Chávez himself, who in May of 1991 wrote to Chancellor Young asking for a department structure for Chicana and Chicano Studies. And in the letter, he says that in the 1990s, it's situated both historically and geographically in the midst of major transitions. He says, as this region's population becomes increasingly Chicano-Latino, it is necessary to respond in many different ways. So it goes to show, again, the multiple strategies that students were using between 1990 and 93, and one of them was getting major labor leaders like César Chávez himself to support the idea of a department. And you know, and this is happening, these demands are happening in the 90s in a time where I argue that the racial climate in California was incredibly hostile toward Latinas and Latinos and immigrants. Proposition 187, Proposition 209, Proposition 227, SB1, SB2. There's so many more examples of policies that if we study those policies, we can make sense of how California was making sense of itself during the time. And the way it was making sense of itself was by arguing that immigrants, specifically those coming from south of the border, are taking all the resources and all the jobs. Let's blame everything on them, and then let's pass legislation. And then at the time, Governor Pete Wilson used that argument and won the re-election because it worked. He convinced a majority voter base that Latino immigrants were part of the problem, and he convinced them not only to vote in favor of Proposition 187, but also to re-elect him as governor. And the type of climate was incredibly hostile in the time, where images like these were seen all over the newspapers of confrontations of, in this case, the gentleman on the left being attacked by someone that was in support of Proposition 187. But see, it didn't just happen outside of UCLA, it also impacted the campus. So let me give you an example. I was lucky enough to find like all these boxes of letters when I was doing archival research out of Chancellor Young's archive. And I'm going to give you two examples. The first letter is from a private citizen, and this is what he says in his letter to Chancellor Young. He says, Chancellor Young, dear sir, the thing that has made this nation great is its European heritage. If the fasters don't like it, let them go back to Mexico. Or this second example from an organization called the Los Angeles Association of White People. Within the letter they say, what can you do with a degree in Chicano Studies, but come back and apply at UCLA to teach it? And I love that quote because that is literally me right now. They also say that Chicanos should start their own college if they want and not want the state university system coddling them. And they end saying, if the requests are given into, we will consider other means of protest, including counter demonstrations, cutting our financial and moral support for UCLA and all other means. And they did cut their financial support. There were numerous letters and memos sent to Chancellor Young canceling their pledge after the negotiation was met during that time. And see, I think what this does is that illustrates that the racial climate in California was really fueling a lot of anti-Latina, Latino, Chicana, Chicano elements. You know, if you I studied the LA Times articles. If any of you have time to go look at those, you see how the LA Times is writing about the protests, and then eventually they change their tone. So this is some of the work that I've done, but in the future, so I was sharing with Ryan Yakota earlier that, and some of the other folks, that when I presented this at LA Mission College about a year ago around this time, I shared this work with community college students, and then someone raises their hand at the end, and I said, yes, you know, what's your question? And he said, so what are you gonna do with all this? And I said, I'm gonna teach it. You know, he's like, well, you're going to write a book and you're going to make a documentary because this is an important story to tell. I'm upset that I've never heard of this story. So this is a response to that student, which is the idea of the next step being the book. And the book is really about placing that 90 through 93 social movement within a larger historical context. I specifically look at the relationship to 1968, the East LA walkouts. And in an article that will come out next week with my colleague Dolores Delgado Bernal, we argue in that piece that the demands students made in 1993 at UCLA included unfinished business from the demands of 1968. And we make that argument because we acknowledge the importance of 1990 and 1993, but we also see the demand of Mexican American studies in 1968 as an inspiration and a genealogical starting point to make sense of the work of 1993 and of 1990, 1991, 1992, and I would say 2018. And it's incredibly special because, you know, Carlos Aro has organized this year earlier the 50-year anniversary of the walkouts, and interestingly enough, we're celebrating now the 25-year anniversary of 1993 here at UCLA. And I want to give some historical context to Chicana and Chicano Studies at UCLA, including things like the High Potential Program, the Chicano Studies Research Center, and then bringing it to 2005 by looking at how the Center for Interdisciplinary Instruction, which wasn't a department, it had department-like qualities, but it wasn't a department yet, how it came to be a department. So I've interviewed since then a lot of folks, including some of you in the room. So I'm now at 60 oral histories, and the majority of the people are student leaders and university personnel, including student leaders from the various organizations, including MECHA, Friends of the Library, Conscious Students of Color, the Asian Pacific Coalition, Samahang Filipino, Raza Graduate Student Association, La Familia de UCLA, and La Gente. I've had the honor to speak with 4 hunger strikers, including Professor Jorge Mancia, Cindy Montañez, Maria Lara, Joaquin Sanchez, and university personnel, including Chancellor Young, his cabinet, faculty, then and faculty now, chairs, the interim chairs, the founding faculty, and of course the staff throughout campus that were around, but also that housed the original center throughout time, and some of them have continued throughout the years. And community members, including Tom Hayden, Dolores Huerta, members of the United Community and Labor Alliance, the Mothers of East Los Angeles, and members of external MECHA chapters. And the archive has been intense. There's so much stuff out there, but recently I found additional stuff, and I'm an archive nerd, so I get excited when I find boxes of stuff. I just want to spend a weekend going through everything. So Ryan Yakoda released some sit-in footage that's about 21 minutes. Milo Alvarez told me, oh, I have another 2 boxes of archives. I'm like, I'm there this summer. I'll bring all the water, the iced water. And Professor Carlos Duval, who also has an archive that has been located. So as I begin to wind down, I'd like to kind of ask these 2 questions of what is the value of student activism and of Chicana and Chicano Studies, and where are we now? This is in no way, quantitative, but qualitatively, of all the students that, or all the people that I've interviewed for my study that were student leaders between 1990 to 2005, I went through and wondered, what are they doing now with their lives? And I found some impressive results. Out of 31, 12 are professors, 3 are K through 12 teachers, 3 are in student affairs, 1 is in counseling, 2 are involved in politics, 3 in the law, 2 a nonprofit, 1 in service management, 2 are in business, and 2 unknown, mostly because I've had time right now, I didn't get a response from them. But I want to stress that when I interview these folks, they often talk about how their activism and Chicana Studies informs the way they view their work today. And that makes so much sense for me on a personal level, because I think of it similarly in terms of how Chicana and Chicano Studies and student leadership has helped me. Professor Eric Avila was giving you numbers, but let me just show you in graph form the tremendous increase of majors and minors at Chicana and Chicano Studies here at UCLA. I want to highlight those numbers. In 1986-87, there were 6 majors. This year, 262 majors and 386 minors. And I'm going to keep embarrassing you, Eli, but you're a big reason why those numbers continue to increase over time. Gracias. And some other accomplishment, Professor Avila also talked about, these huge numbers in these intro courses, but also I want to show you something really quick. Number of undergraduate courses and undergraduate students, the way that they've increased from 93 to 94, we have had an increase of 89 courses and an increase of 4,271 enrollments. For the graduate program, which is only, 6 years old? an increase of 5 courses and an increase of 42 enrollments, which tells us that graduate students from other departments are coming to Chicana and Chicano Studies to get graduate level training, just in these years. So it tells us a lot about the value of the department in the long run. I want to quote here, with permission of Professor Reynaldo Macias, a wonderful quote that he gave me that I walked away with just feeling inspired by, but also motivated about thinking about what's in the future. When I had the pleasure to speak with him multiple times, he said, if we build it, they will come. And I think the numbers are testament to that message and to that vision. And especially coming from someone like Professor Reynaldo Macias, who was here as a member of UMAS, of MECHA, and returned as chair of the CII and saw the department structure happen under his chairship, I think is an important vision that is prophetic but also revolutionary, because it really shows us that if we do work together, these things can work. So why is this important? I have a few thoughts on this. It's important because we need to tell our stories. It's important because the strategies worked. It's important because in the middle of a conservative political climate in California in the 1990s, the César E. Chávez Center for Interdisciplinary Instruction in Chicana and Chicano Studies was born. It's important because Chicana and Chicano Studies has made UCLA a better place. It's important because it was demanded at least since 1990 as a department structure, and as Blanca Gordo says, it required networks of people to come together and make this happen. And it worked despite differences of opinions and philosophies. I think it's important because it allows us also to negotiate the current political climate, to look at this as a case study that can teach us a lot, not only as students, but also as faculty and as administrators. How do we engage social change and include students in the process? I think is an important lesson that we could take today. I think it's also important because the Latino population is expected to reach 25% before 2050. They're going to deal with this in Kentucky and many other places. And we need to tell our story because they need to learn from us here at UCLA. And it's also important because of this growth of Chicana and Chicano studies and ethnic studies across California into high schools and also in Texas and beyond. I want to take a quick pause to acknowledge that last night I received an email from Dr. Jorge Mancias, who was an assistant professor here at UCLA. And during his time, he was a member of a committee with Professor Grivalca and many others that were advising Chancellor Young on the potential department structure. When I interviewed him, I was incredibly moved by his story. And he heard of this, and last night he sent me this email and he said, Hola Pepe, y'all don't know, everybody calls me Pepe. He said, I just learned about the symposium tomorrow, May 25th, and saw that some of the participants in the hunger strike will be there. Please give them my regards. I have not seen them in a long time. Good luck with the event. If you don't mind my butting in, could I suggest a moment of recognition for Tom Hayden, who recently passed away and who played an important role in the outcome of the strike. In fact, it is no coincidence that he was one of those who signed the agreement with the administration. Signed, Dr. Jorge Mancias. As a form of remembering Tom Hayden, I'd like to share a quick excerpt from the oral history I conducted with him in his Culver City office in 2013. When I asked him about his relationship to social movements and to the hunger strike and the sit-in, he said, I had a baptism, a rebirth of sorts, a kind of education. I made a lifelong commitment to the movement, or la causa, sometime in the early 60s. Toward the end of our oral history, I asked him about his signature on the hunger strike agreement. He said, yes, they wanted me to be there as a witness. He recalled being there often and talking with the different students and the leaders. I then asked, do you have any memories of that moment when the signing was happening? He responded, I was emotional, but I had to take care of business. All I remember was, we've got to get the strikers into the hospital, make sure that they're okay, get that done, and then I can get emotional. So in memoriam to him, but also to the many other student leaders, the commemoration to all of you. And I'd like to ask all of you that were student leaders between 1990 to 93 that are in the room, if you wouldn't mind, please standing so that we can acknowledge you here today. Y'all are going to be shy. So thanks to you, thanks to faculty, administrators, staff that coalesced and made this happen. Thank you all, and thank you for your time. I'm very grateful for this opportunity. Thank you.